Jordan Riak is retired now, but the actions that he set into motion changed laws not only in this country, but in other countries. He experienced the pain of having his son terrorized in school because of a caning. Caning is where the child's hands are held out and beaten with a rod made of cane, which is extremely painful and extremely terrifying for every child watching it. Giving corporal punishment in schools has been a system in the past for as long as we can possibly remember. But that's changed because of people like Jordan Riak. Jordan studied the effects of violence completely. We cannot teach our children to stop beating up on their little brothers and sisters, or we're going to beat them up. We cannot correct violence with violence. We can correct violence with logic, understanding, teaching them cause and effect, removing privileges, and making them understand the feelings and emotions of other people, other circumstances, and other places. But that takes time. Time is very important. Our lives are made up of time. Isn't a child worth the investment of a little time to help them guide their future, to help them become what they need to become, to teach them analytical thinking instead of just striking out at discontent, fear, or inconvenience? Our children follow the things that we do. Our actions speak louder than our words ever will. Our children also follow the paths that we think that we're hiding, because they can see what you have not stated. They can emotionally feel the results of your behavior. If you treat them like their feelings, their emotions, their needs, and their wants don't count compared to yours, they will learn that very quickly, and they will feel very devalued. And the more you do it, the lower they will feel. If you teach them that beating up on them will make them smarter, you're teaching them a lie. When someone is threatening you or beating up on you, it doesn't make you smarter. It makes you terrified, concerned on how to protect yourself and not get any more trouble. It doesn't help you concentrate on the problem at hand. It doesn't help you solve anything. It just makes you cower to stay out of trouble. Beating up on somebody doesn't create wisdom. Responsibility creates wisdom. Cause and effect, and experiencing the cause of the effects that we enact and creates wisdom. Our children will follow what we do because our actions are the greatest teacher. Your child cannot learn to respect human rights if you don't believe they have any. Please welcome our guest, Jordan Riak. Our guest today is Jordan Riak. Jordan's claim to fame, and well earned, has been based on stopping physical violence against children in schools. Jordan has started a great program that has gone many directions. Please welcome Jordan Riak.
Good morning.
It's nice to have you here.
It's my pleasure.
Share your story with us, Jordan.
Well, let's see. Many years ago, when one of my sons was had moved into a neighborhood where the school used corporal punishment, I became introduced to the issue. And I was alarmed, I was outraged, and I took up the issue. Now, understand, I grew up in New Jersey, and New Jersey had abolished corporal punishment in schools during the Civil War era. And I assumed that the whole civilized world behaved that way. And then when we moved into an area that used corporal punishment, I was stunned. And I began my campaign then, and that would have been in the middle or late 70s when I started working on this issue.
What happened to your son that so impressed you? Not just the corporal punishment, but what happened surrounding the incident?
Well, he came home terrified, and because one of his friends had gotten corporally punished. And he was so frightened. I knew as soon as I picked him up after school, he was very cranky, very upset. And I said, Justin, what happened to you today at school? Because when I left you at school this morning, you were in good spirits, and now you're like a time bomb ready to explode. And I found out what had happened. His friend had gotten in trouble, caned. This was in Sydney, Australia. We had moved from New Jersey to Sydney, Australia, and where corporal punishment was commonplace. And Justin knew that he came within that far of, he could have been caned as well.
Define to our listening audience what caned means. It's not necessarily a local term.
All right, caning means this child is required to hold his or her hand out like that, palm up, and the teacher or school principal hits the hand with a stick. The stick is a 1 meter long piece of cane, the same kind of wood that wicker furniture is made of.
Oh.
And it's about 39 inches long. The teacher comes down, swings the cane down, and it strikes the hand across the palm. Now, of course, across the palm, to miss the fingers, you have to be lucky, and that's the wrong word. Luck has no part in this. But when you're swinging a stick at somebody's hand, there's the risk of injury. And of course, inevitable pain and inevitable terror. In my son's case, he was terrified even though he didn't get caned, but he knew that if his friend got caned, he could be next.
I see. And so you rose to action to protect him.
Yes.
Of course.
Right.
And you didn't just protect him, you rose to action to protect children from physical violence in schools.
Well, my assumption was wherever this is allowed, this is an outrage. To me, it's no different than saying it's okay for husbands to beat wives or for employers to beat employees. Beating is not okay in any circumstances. One human being does not have the right to do that to another human being.
No, they don't. No, they don't. So that was the beginning
Yes.
of changing laws. And you changed laws in a lot of places. What did you do?
Well, in Sydney, Australia, my first step was to draft an open letter, print it. Now, these were the days when photocopying machines used liquid toner, so that gives you some idea of the history.
Okay.
I wrote a little one-page leaflet that was an open letter to parents.
Okay.
And I printed up a handful of them, and when the children were filing on to go to the bus to go home, I handed out the letter to them, and I said, read it on your way home. When you get home, give it to your moms or dads. And that letter condemned the practice, and that's how it started. And I worked for several years in Sydney to lobby for the change, and eventually it took place. Right now, New South Wales, Australia, there is no corporal punishment, no legal corporal punishment. Now, understand, when a practice becomes illegal, that doesn't mean it stops instantly, because you have entrenched habits, you have people who refuse to accept that what they've been doing is wrong, and they persist in doing it, even though the law has been changed. Then they don't take the law seriously. They say, well, what's the matter? You mean I can't spank a naughty child? Been doing it all my life. It was done to me, and look how well I turned out. You hear all those excuses and alibis. So the law changes today, but the behavior doesn't change until tomorrow. But eventually it changes, and the time comes when people look back and they are amazed that this was ever allowed. No different than with wife beating or the beating of employees or apprentices.
So what you're saying is you first have to change the thinking. You have to change the thinking before you can change the actions.
The behavior, right. And to change the thinking, you have to persuade enough lawmakers to introduce legislation or to change rules, whether it's local or state or national. They have to change the rules officially, and then the new custom puts down roots, and people realize we don't do that anymore.
Beating up on somebody that's smaller than us has been accepted in our culture for a long, long time. And I
Yes.
mean our cultures around the world.
Yes.
And to get people to see the irrationality of that must have been quite a job.
Well, generally people don't see a victim as an equal. You can argue with a husband who hits his wife, and you can say, look, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, if you want to quote scripture. Or you don't use violence against any human being. And that husband's response will be, well, I'm not using violence. I'm just chastising my wife because she was disrespectful. What's wrong with that? My father did it to my mother. My granddad did it to my grandma. And we all turned out okay. Well, to get that message to sink in and take root, it takes a little time.
They didn't really turn out okay if they think
No,
violence is okay.
no, they didn't turn out okay. They paid a big price.
Yeah.
And when we look at it from the outside, we look at what they went through and the consequences, we realize that they paid a big price. And eventually they come to realize they paid a big price. Eventually they disown the behavior. And I've argued with people who said, well, you mean corporal punishment in school? Oh, that hasn't happened for hundreds of years.
Wrong.
Wait a minute. By pushing it back in history, in your imagination, doesn't really remove the proximity of that kind of mistreatment from the now. Actually, it happened very recently. But you want to push it back, make it seem like it's antiquated, and it doesn't happen anymore.
Well, when the person in power, or the person that is the biggest, inflicts punishment and violence on somebody who's littler, basically they're endorsing the same behavior everywhere. How can they expect their children not to hurt smaller children if that's what they're doing?
Right, yeah. It's so inconsistent when you say, I'm going to give you a good spanking and that'll teach you not to bully your baby brother.
Right.
Well, it's,
confuse them with logic.
yes, exactly.
You changed a lot of laws.
Well, thank you. I hope so.
And you changed them in this country, and you changed them in other countries, and you never gave up.
No, I keep going. And what's fascinating to me now is that there are so many organizations that have embraced this reform. I can't keep up with them. I get mail from so many, and I see their websites. We're reaching so many, the message is reaching so many people through so many different venues. And there's so many reformers that are working on it that have embraced it, and that's good news. In a way, it's not good for my ego. It was fun being at the center of the storm, but now it's nice to be able to relax and know that the job is being done by so many.
Well, Jordan, even though you're retired, you're still at the center of the storm.
Well, thank you.
Tell us how you go and teach in prisons and what happens in those situations.
Well, I was invited by the directors of a program at Folsom State Prison. It's a prison for men, and I was invited to address men who were in the pre-release program. These are men that were due to go home imminently, and many of them didn't know how to do things like open a bank account, rent a mailbox, sign a lease or read a lease. Some of them had been incarcerated most of their lives, and now they're due to go home, and they've got a lot to learn. And the pre-release program was voluntary, and it had a limit. And the number of people who subscribed to it, who wanted to get into the pre-release program, exceeded the capacity of that class. So it was full.
That need to know how to deal with the outside world and how to deal in the outside world correctly is huge, isn't it?
It is. They had never learned that, many of them. And my role, as I saw it, as I interpreted it, and as the people that invited me interpreted it, I believe, was to help these men be better fathers than the fathers that they had had. And my objective was to dissuade them that there's ever an excuse for striking a child. And call it whatever you want: chastisement, punishment, spanking, a little slap on the butt, a pop on the bottom, all the cutesy words that we have for it. I had to dissuade them of that, of the legitimacy of that kind of behavior, and show them where it leads. And one of the experiments that I did with the men, I did this with every class, and I always got the same result. After I had their confidence, now mind you, inmates in a state prison are very savvy. They know when they're being conned. They know when somebody's trying to lead them by the nose. You can't fool them. Once I had established rapport with my class, and this, I had them only for one session. I saw this group of men only once, and next month it would be a different group. But once I had established trust between them and me, I said, look, I want you to listen very closely to what I'm going to describe, and this, if this description fits your memory of your childhood, raise your hand. And this is what I described. I said, when you as a child, you lived in a family where you knew that your body was your own personal private property. You knew that no one had the right to hit you, slap you, spank you, swat you, bop you, punish you physically. You knew that you were in charge of your own body. If you grew up in a family like that, raise your hand.
What happened?
I'd be looking out over a class of men, and they're looking at me, and I'm looking at them. They're pondering my question, and we're all waiting for a hand to go up. Not one hand went up.
Not one
Not
hand.
one.
Not one.
Repeated over and over again. So when somebody says, well, you got to spank them when they're little, keep them out of trouble later, don't spank them today, they'll wind up in prison tomorrow, the evidence does not support that theory.
So all of these guys in prison, every single one of them had experienced physical violence as a child.
Everyone that did my experiment, and the men in my class, it was routine. And of course I did the experiment not to teach myself anything. I knew what the answer would be. If they were honest with me, I knew there would be no hands going up. But I wanted them to get the lesson from each other. I wanted them to know that they're all part of this same picture.
You wanted them to know that violence begets violence.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
the excuse that it is discipline, popping them, smacking them, making them do what's right, is an excuse, because a lot of parents don't really know that. They were taught that that's what they should do, so
Yes.
they did it. But it isn't the right thing to do. Just because they were taught that doesn't make it the right thing to do.
No, and they learn from the way they were treated. And the way we're treated when we're children, those lessons become fixed. They're very hard to reverse or to eradicate, very difficult. How your mom and dad behave largely determined how you behave.
We're in trouble,
We
Jordan.
are in trouble. We
We're in
are in
trouble.
trouble. Now, how it changes, and we're in the midst of a change now. As soon as the behavior becomes loses respect generally, and people begin to see that their neighbors don't hit their children, their family members don't hit their children. As soon as they begin to recognize that it's frowned on, they become hesitant about doing it. Now, there was a time when a child behaved in a way that upset the caretaker. Wherever they were, on the street, in the store, the parent would give the child a smack. What's happening today? Before the parent might have that impulse to give the child a smack. And I remember that impulse had its origins in what that parent's parent did.
Exactly.
That's where it began. But when they raise that hand, their impulse is to spank the child, They look around. Who's watching me?
Exactly.
Is somebody going to call Child Protective Services? Am I going to be arrested? Am I going to embarrass myself?
Right.
Then they say, you wait till I get you home. When nobody's watching, wait till I get you home. And of course, that's a threat.
Right.
The child knows the meaning of it.
Yeah.
And the parent feels, well, whatever, if I say this is different than hitting the child. I'm just threatening him.
Right.
So that's that change. We're in the middle of that change now. And that's a good sign.
That is a good sign. Jordan, explain what happens to trust when a child is physically violated. What happens to trust? What happens to trust when a wife is physically violated? When you physically attack a person, mildly or extremely, what happens to trust in that relationship?
That trust goes right out the window. Then the victim is constantly on guard. Am I going to say something that's going to make my spouse smack me? Am I going to upset my parent? Am I going to get a swat, a spanking, a licking, a threat? So everything is measured by that danger zone. And that's not what we want between people who care about each other and trust each other. My relationship with people is not built on fear, and I don't want them to fear me either.
I don't think most people realize that it destroys trust.
Yeah.
I don't think they really realize it. I personally experienced that
Yes.
physical violence in the form of alleged discipline, and the trust was gone forever.
Yeah.
It was over.
Yes. Yeah. Then you learn that all your relationships, if your relationships with the most important people in your life, your parents,
Right.
or later your spouse,
Right.
or your employer, or your teachers, if those relationships are built on a foundation that is insecure, if they're built on a foundation of fear, then you learn that's the way you deal with people. You embrace that method of dealing with others. I say in my little booklet, Plain Talk About Spanking, that that the child who's treated that way learns that the best protection against being a victim is to become a victimizer. Where does bullying start? It starts from the adults in charge. They teach the child that you control others by intimidation, and the child learns that lesson, and the child learns to intimidate baby brother, baby sister.
Well, the
whomever.
problem involved is they grow up in a world where there's only control and be controlled. Self-control is never introduced. So they
Yeah.
believe that if they are not controlled, they will be a controller, and they don't want to be controlled, so they become a controller.
Become a controller, exactly.
And they don't comprehend self-control at all because it's never been in their life. They've never seen somebody use self-control, logic and intelligence to solve a problem.
Right.
They've only seen them come in with force and dominance.
Force, exactly. And I don't care how young a child is, you learn how to approach them and persuade them with reason. You speak on their level. You persuade. And whether that's the relationship, a good relationship between parents and children is built on reasonable persuasion, on logic, and good example, and the same between nations. When your neighboring nation is behaving in a way that upsets you, express your upset, but do it in a reasonable, logical way. Appeal to their sense of understanding of logic. But if you say, if you do this again, I'm going to bomb your harbor, or I'm
Right.
going to torpedo your merchant ships,
And we haven't changed much.
not very much. The world still runs by that principle.
Yes, it does, and it's really unfortunate because what happens is that if we violate another person or country because we can't control them, they're going to do the same thing back.
Oh, they feel they have
When does it
perfect
stop?
perfect license to retaliate in like fashion.
It doesn't stop.
Yes, it doesn't.
It doesn't stop. We go on. The truth of the matter is that the differences, not the similarities, the differences that we have will make us grow and make us wiser if we'll sit down and share those differences until a third thing is born built upon those differences that is the greatest good for the greatest number, and we become better.
Yes.
We become better, not more violent, better. We solve the problem, not destroy the people.
Yes.
But we don't know how to do that
No.
because we don't see self-control as an ambition in life.
Right.
We're still struggling with controlling and being controlled.
Exactly. You said it perfectly. I could not improve on what you've just said.
Thank you. I would like to hold your book up to the camera. This is Jordan's book. It's a small booklet. It's a powerful booklet. It is a dynamic booklet. Jordan, I realize that what you have done has gone into many school districts, it's gone into many interviews, it's gone into many publications, but I couldn't resist the opportunity to find you and to interview you in person.
Well, I'm flattered.
Because
I'm delighted to be here.
Your message is so needed. It is so needed. I grew up in a family that believed that physical violence was the way to go.
Yes.
I grew up in a dysfunctional family, as did most of us. I'm not unusual. Of course, I think my family was extremely dysfunctional, which is unusual, but it's all right. What happens is that when we get in enough pain, it propels us sometimes to go the other direction. And I personally want to thank you for what you've done.
It's my delight in being here. I'm glad I've answered some of your questions. I've done my best.
You've done very well. Is there anything you would like to add?
Well, I would say that if your viewers and listeners want a copy of this, they can email me or contact me and I'll send it to them at no obligation.
Wow.
And they can read it online too.
You'll send it to them free.
Free, there's no charge.
Absolutely free. There's no
absolutely free.
charge.
And they can
This-
find it on our website, nospank.net. You can read it in its entirety right on the website.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is a wonderful offer. It can change your life. It is really important. Jordan, you're unbelievable.
Thank you. You flatter me.
No, I don't. Jordan, you know, people like you are the unsung heroes in our country. People like you. Thank you
It's a
so
pleasure.
much.
It's a pleasure.
Jordan Riak reminds us that the child who is beaten on Monday will not say no to the child molester on Tuesday. We want to thank Jordan Riak for everything that he has done. He's the most remarkable man.
A message from safekidsnow.com. The seed we sow in our children are not our words, but our behavior.